The room fell into a silence so sharp it felt almost unreal. Cameras panned, eyes widened, and for the first time in the entire hearing, Elon Musk had no words. Across from him, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her voice calm but unshakable, delivering her eighth point with the kind of clarity that leaves no room for rebuttal. The billionaire who so often dominated boardrooms, headlines, and digital spaces sat frozen, lips pressed together, forced into quiet by a truth that pierced through every interruption he had thrown her way. The audience gasped, not because they didn't expect Crockett to fight back, but because no one imagined she would bring the world's loudest man to absolute silence. But this wasn't where the story began. To understand the gravity of this moment, to understand why silence itself became the loudest sound in that chamber, you have to rewind. Because before the silence, there were 7 interruptions, 7 calculated attempts by Musk to bulldoze the conversation, to belittle, to reframe, to control. Each one carried the arrogance of a man convinced that his wealth could outtalk anyone, even an elected official. And yet, with every interruption, something remarkable was happening. Crockett wasn't shrinking. She wasn't rattled. Instead, she was stacking her composure, sharpening her message, waiting. Every time he cut her off, he gave her ammunition. Every time he tried to talk over her, he prepared her for the one strike that would land when it mattered most. Viewers who would later scroll through endless clips on social media would only see the end result, the stunned silence, the hashtag, the memes. But the real drama lived in the buildup, in the escalating clash between unchecked power and steady resilience. This wasn't just about one man's interruptions or one woman's patience. It was about something bigger, the collision of arrogance and dignity in front of the nation's eyes. And so, to understand why that silence mattered, to feel its weight, you must watch the storm that came before it. Because Elon Musk thought he was cutting her down, thought his interruptions were burying her voice. What he didn't realize was that each one was laying the foundation for her final blow. What Musk didn't know was that every interruption was leading to the one moment he couldn't stop. The committee room was heavy with anticipation, the kind of air that carries the weight of history. Rows of cameras lined the back wall, lenses trained on every flicker of expression, every slip of tone. This wasn't just another hearing. It was theater, a stage where democracy itself was performing for a nation glued to their screens. Every reporter knew the stakes. Every viewer sensed that what was about to unfold would ripple far beyond the walls of Congress. At the center of it all sat Elon Musk, billionaire titan, face of boundless ambition, a man who had built empires on the power of disruption. He leaned back in his chair with an ease that spoke volumes. He had walked into this room expecting to dominate, to steer the narrative as he had so many times before in boardrooms and on social media. His smirk carried the arrogance of someone who believed his voice was louder than the system designed to hold him accountable. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Unlike Musk, she did not lounge. She leaned in. Her posture was not casual but purposeful, a woman carrying not just her own words but the voices of people who often felt unseen in the shadows of billionaires. For Crockett, this hearing wasn't about personal ambition. It was about drawing a line in the sand, about reminding the world that no fortune, no ego, no empire was above answering to the people. The clash between them was more than a political skirmish. It was the purest distillation of an American tension that had existed since the birth of the Republic. People versus power, dignity versus dominance. Musk's billions gave him a reach that transcended borders, industries, even governments. Yet here he was in a room bound by rules and order, confronted by a woman whose authority came not from money, but from the mandate of her district and the ideals of democracy. Every camera angle captured the imbalance. Musk, restless, adjusting his microphone, cutting in with dismissive tones. Crockett, steady, her words measured, her presence immovable. The spectacle was clear, an unstoppable ego colliding with an unshakable will. And the country watched, breath held, not because of what was being debated, but because of what was being decided beneath the surface. Would democracy still mean something in the face of unbridled wealth? Would dignity still hold weight against arrogance? The interruptions began early, and with each one the drama sharpened. Musk's voice, impatient and forceful, tried to crowd out Crockett's arguments. He spoke over her not with facts, but with the sheer force of his belief that his voice mattered more. But Crockett did not waver. She did not break her rhythm. Instead, she let the interruptions wash over her like waves against a rock. Her composure unbroken, her message sharpening with each attempt to silence her. This wasn't just a debate. It became something larger. A test of whether patience could outlast provocation. A test of whether truth could withstand noise. A test of dignity itself. And as the interruptions mounted, so too did the tension in the room. Reporters scribbled frantically, live feeds lit up with commentary, and millions at home leaned closer to their screens, because everyone could feel it. The moment was building toward something unforgettable. Musk thought he was controlling the stage, but in reality, every attempt to drown Crockett out was pulling him closer to a silence he could never have imagined. And silence, as the nation was about to discover, can sometimes roar louder than any voice. To understand why Elon Musk walked into that committee room with the kind of arrogance that dripped from every glance, every smirk, every interruption, you have to look at the man's history. For years, Musk has built not just companies but a mythology. One where he is the genius rebel, the billionaire who bends the rules of industries, nations, and even governments. And when the world rewards someone for breaking every boundary, when headlines crown them as a visionary while overlooking the wreckage they leave behind, arrogance stops being a flaw. It becomes a way of life. Musk's rise is filled with moments that built his legend. Tesla's electric cars, SpaceX's rockets, his ventures into artificial intelligence and satellite internet, all sold to the public as bold leaps into the future. But behind those triumphs lies a pattern: domination through disruption. He didn't just challenge industries. He mocked the people who dared to question him. Journalists who raised concerns about Tesla's safety records were called boring. Politicians who questioned his monopolistic reach were brushed off as irrelevant. Employees who demanded fair treatment were often met with a culture that thrived on exhaustion, not balance. And in public, the mocking tone became his trademark. Twitter, now X under his control, turned into his personal megaphone where insults were fired off like weapons, and anyone who dared push back was ridiculed to millions. He relished confrontation not in the name of truth but in the thrill of dominance. To Musk, critics weren't participants in dialogue. They were obstacles to be crushed. That same energy carried into every high-stakes appearance. At shareholder meetings, he cut off questioners mid-sentence. In interviews, he smirked his way past accountability. Even in casual conversations, his tone suggested he was the smartest man in any room, no matter how complex the subject. Musk was a disruptor, yes, but not just of industries. He disrupted the very concept of respectful exchange. This is why, when Musk sat in that congressional chamber, no one should have been surprised that he interrupted Jasmine Crockett 7 times. It was who he was. He had trained himself over years of unchecked dominance to believe interruptions were not rude but natural. Why listen when you can bulldoze? Why yield when you can talk louder? Consider the controversies that defined him. When critics questioned unsafe working conditions at Tesla factories, he dismissed them as exaggerations. When experts raised alarms about the reckless pace of AI development, Musk shifted blame to others while presenting himself as the reluctant prophet. When confronted with accusations of silencing dissent on his platforms, he cloaked himself in the language of free speech, while arbitrarily amplifying voices that suited his narrative. Every time he escaped unscathed, not because the criticisms lacked merit, but because his wealth insulated him. His myth distracted from the truth, and his confidence drowned out the doubters. And that's what made him dangerous in this moment. He wasn't just a billionaire answering questions. He was a man conditioned to believe that no one, no government, no journalist, no elected official could pin him down. His power wasn't only his fortune. It was the aura of inevitability he carried, the belief that Musk always wins, Musk always dominates, Musk always interrupts, and the world always lets him. Yet arrogance has a way of blinding even the sharpest minds. Musk believed his interruptions were tactics, but what he didn't see was that each one revealed more about him than about his opponent. Each time he cut in, viewers at home saw not a visionary but a bully. Each time he raised his voice, the public saw insecurity masked as dominance. And each time he mocked or smirked, he eroded the myth he had spent decades building. Because arrogance can build an empire, but it can also light the fuse for its unraveling. Musk had silenced critics before, but never someone like Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't a journalist he could mock online, or an employee bound by contracts. She was an elected official with a platform of her own, backed not by wealth but by the trust of voters and the resilience of her lived experience. And most importantly, she carried a composure that made arrogance look childish in comparison. So while Musk believed he was walking into another stage to dominate, what he didn't know was that he was stepping into something different. This time, arrogance would not shield him. This time, interruptions would not save him. This time, the smirk would fade, the mocking tone would stumble, and the dominance would collapse into silence. But Musk was about to meet someone who refused to bow down. Before the cameras, before the headlines, before the moment when her words would silence the richest man in the world, Jasmine Crockett was something far more ordinary. A woman who learned through trial and fire that the world does not hand dignity to anyone, you have to fight for it. Her story begins not in the halls of Congress, but in the neighborhoods where injustice felt like an everyday reality. Growing up, she saw firsthand how entire communities could be written off, how voices could be ignored simply because they lacked wealth or status. Those experiences planted in her a truth that would guide her forever. If no one speaks for the overlooked, then silence becomes a weapon of oppression. Crockett decided early on that she would not be silent. Her first battlefield was the courtroom. As an attorney, she didn't chase the glamour cases, the ones that put names in headlines. She fought for those whose names would otherwise never be spoken: the worker wrongfully terminated, the immigrant denied a fair chance, the family scraping for justice after being dismissed by the system. She stepped into courtrooms with nothing but preparation and resolve, facing off against lawyers who had more resources, more connections, and sometimes more arrogance than truth. And yet time after time she held her ground. She learned the power of composure, of waiting until the moment when facts delivered with calm precision could shatter the bluster of an opponent. That composure was not natural, it was earned. There were moments when anger threatened to spill over, when frustration burned hot as she watched injustice play out in real time. But Crockett mastered the discipline of restraint. She discovered that in a world that feeds on spectacle, dignity itself can be the sharpest weapon. Every victory reinforced that lesson. Composure is not weakness, composure is control. But it wasn't easy. Sacrifice was stitched into every step of her journey. Long nights preparing cases left little room for rest. Finances were stretched thin when she chose clients who couldn't always pay. And beyond the courtroom, she carried the weight of being a black woman in spaces where her presence was sometimes treated as an inconvenience rather than an authority. Microaggressions were constant, dismissals frequent, and the temptation to simply walk away was real. Yet she pressed forward, fueled by a conviction larger than her own comfort. That conviction led her to public service. Transitioning from advocacy to politics was not a leap of ambition, but a natural extension of her mission: to fight for dignity on a broader stage. Running for office meant knocking on doors, listening to people whose stories echoed her own past, and promising to be more than just another voice lost in the noise of Washington. She promised to fight with the same tenacity she brought into courtrooms, but this time for an entire district, for an entire people. And when she won, it wasn't just a personal victory. It was validation that the struggle she had endured mattered, that her calm but fierce presence was exactly what her community needed. In Congress, Crockett carried the same philosophy she had always lived by: stay composed, stay clear, and never let arrogance rewrite the truth. She watched colleagues lose themselves to the theatrics of politics, raising their voices louder than their arguments, turning hearings into spectacles. She refused. Her style was different. She believed in the slow burn, the carefully constructed point, the moment of precision that lands like a hammer, not because it's shouted, but because it's undeniable. And so, when she walked into that committee room to face Elon Musk, she did not carry intimidation. She carried memory. Memory of the countless times she had been underestimated. Memory of the nights she wondered if the fight was worth it. Memory of the people who told her to stay quiet, who told her the system was too stacked, who told her billionaires and power brokers would always win. She carried all of it, and she let it fuel her calm. Because this wasn't just another man across the table. This was the embodiment of every arrogance she had ever faced, every dismissive smirk, every attempt to talk over her. every suggestion that her voice did not belong. Musk was a titan of industry, yes, but to Crockett he was just another opponent who believed his power excused his interruptions. And she had dealt with men like him all her life. Her journey had given her a rare gift, the ability to see arrogance not as something to fear, but as something to outlast. She understood that every interruption was an unforced error, every dismissal an opening. She didn't need to shout to win. She needed only to stay steady, to wait, to let her truth rise above the noise. And so, as the richest man alive prepared to bulldoze through the hearing, Crockett prepared to do what she had always done, to stand her ground, to stay composed, to speak not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by arrogance. Every fight, every sacrifice, every quiet victory had prepared her for this day, the day she would face Elon Musk and prove that dignity could silence even the loudest voice in the room. The first interruption came almost casually, a dismissive chuckle followed by Musk's voice cutting across Crockett's opening remarks. "That's simply not accurate," he said, leaning into his microphone before she had even completed her sentence. The arrogance was familiar, the kind of tactic that had worked for him in countless interviews. But Crockett didn't flinch. She paused, let him finish, then returned to her thought with steady precision, as if his words were no more than background noise. The second interruption arrived sharper. He leaned forward, voice elevated, insisting she was misrepresenting the facts. This time, Crockett glanced briefly at him, then back at her notes, resuming without raising her tone. The silence between his outburst and her calm reply told viewers everything. Musk was playing offense, but she was controlling the rhythm. By the third interruption, the tension had grown thicker. Musk, visibly irritated, raised his hand as though dismissing her entirely, muttering that her perspective was flawed. A ripple moved through the room, some members shifting in their seats, journalists scribbling faster. Crockett inhaled, exhaled, and continued. Her refusal to match his aggression became its own quiet victory, a contrast that grew sharper with every attempt he made to drown her out. The fourth interruption was louder still, almost theatrical. Musk spoke over her with a tone dripping in sarcasm, his words crafted to belittle, but Crockett's response was not retaliation. She stopped, waited for him to finish, then resumed where she had left off as if his attempt had been nothing more than static on a radio. The calmness was not weakness. It was strategy. It was rope-a-dope, letting the opponent burn his energy while she conserved hers. By the fifth interruption, the room had shifted. The audience wasn't simply annoyed with Musk's behavior. They were watching Crockett with admiration. Every time he tried to shut her down, her composure grew more striking. People leaned forward, sensing the pattern, realizing that each interruption was less about stopping her and more about revealing him. Musk wasn't exposing flaws in her argument. He was exposing his own inability to tolerate a voice he couldn't dominate. The sixth interruption broke into outright hostility. He raised his voice, declared her line of questioning irrelevant, and spoke with the impatience of a man unaccustomed to restraint. Cameras captured the flash in his eyes, the sharpness in his tone. Yet once again, Crockett refused to take the bait. She folded her hands, waited, and when he was done, she returned with a single measured phrase that reset the conversation back to her terms. The composure struck harder than any raised voice could. Then came the seventh. By now, Musk was visibly unsettled. His words tumbled over hers, desperate to reclaim the authority he felt slipping. The arrogance that once looked confident now looked unsteady, frantic even. Crockett allowed him his interruption, her face unbothered, her expression steady. When he finally stopped, she did not rush to respond. She let the silence hang, a silence that underscored just how out of control his interruptions had become. The room felt it. The audience watching online felt it. 7 interruptions had passed, each one bolder, each one exposing more of Musk's insecurity and more of Crockett's strength. This wasn't just a hearing anymore, it was a duel. Like rounds in a boxing match, Musk had thrown his punches wild and aggressive, but Crockett had absorbed them all without staggering. And now, after the 7th, everyone knew the next round would be different. The room leaned forward, because everyone sensed her 8th response would be different. It happened in an instant, but it felt like the world slowed to watch it unfold. Jasmine Crockett, after 7 relentless interruptions, finally leaned into her microphone with the quiet confidence of someone who had been waiting for this precise moment. Her eyes didn't dart nervously, her hands didn't tremble. Instead, she straightened her papers, adjusted her tone, and spoke with a calm so cutting that it sliced through the noise before she even reached the heart of her words. "Elon," she began, "not Mr. Musk, not Sir." The simplicity of his first name carried weight, stripping away the armor of titles and fortunes. "You've interrupted me 7 times now. 7 times. And each time you've done exactly what billionaires do best. You've assumed your voice is more valuable than mine." The room stilled. His smirk faltered just slightly, the camera zooming in on the faintest shift in his expression. She continued, voice even but resonant, each word measured as though she were striking a drum that only grew louder in its precision. "You want to talk about innovation, about disruption, about the future? Fine. But let's tell the truth about what that future looks like. Workers collapsing in your factories because breaks are a luxury. Journalists harassed on the platform you bought. Communities left in chaos when your experiments fail. You've built an empire, yes, but it is an empire balanced on the backs of people you refuse to see." Musk shifted in his seat, his hand hovering over the microphone as though ready to interrupt again. But something about her tone, firm, unshaken, froze him. He lowered his hand. Cameras caught it all. The billionaire who so often dominated conversations now silenced not by force, but by the steady weight of accountability. Crockett pressed on. "And here's what you don't understand. Interrupting me doesn't erase the facts. Dismissing me doesn't change the truth. Because dignity, Mr. Musk, isn't yours to give or take. It belongs to the people who keep this country alive, the people you've tried to talk over your entire career." A gasp rippled through the room. Journalists typed furiously, their phones buzzing as the first tweets began to appear. "Crockett just shut Musk down in real time." "Mic drop moment in Congress." Elon finally silenced. The hashtags began to form before she even finished her sentence. Carl Crockett vs. Musk. Silence speaks Na's 8th point, but Crockett wasn't done. She leaned forward, her tone tightening, sharpening into its final strike. "You can interrupt me 7 times or 70, but the truth will always get its 8th point. And the truth is this: no amount of money makes you bigger than democracy. No platform, no rocket, no fortune can drown out the voice of the people. And I am here on their behalf to remind you that this microphone doesn't belong to you. It belongs to them." The words landed with the force of a hammer striking steel. The chamber fell into silence, not the awkward silence of a pause, but the heavy electric silence of history being made. Musk's lips parted slightly as though a rebuttal might form, but nothing came. His jaw tightened, his gaze flickered downward, and for the first time the man who seemed to live on a stage found himself stripped of lines. The cameras panned across the room. Some committee members shifted, stunned. Others nodded subtly, acknowledging the blow that had just landed. But it wasn't just those inside the chamber who felt it. Across the country, millions watching the live stream leaned closer to their screens, replaying her words in real time, clipping them, sharing them, searing them into the narrative of the day. On social media, the eruption was instant. One tweet, "She did it." Crockett just handed Elon Musk the silence he's never known. Another, "This is bigger than politics. This is power finally being told no." Memes sprang up within minutes. Images of Musk's frozen face captioned with Crockett's closing line. The silence itself became the meme, the moment, the message. And in living rooms, in classrooms, in offices across America, people who had felt talked over, dismissed, erased by power, felt something else, validation. They saw in Crockett's calm takedown the embodiment of their own struggles. They saw that dignity could still triumph, that arrogance could still be checked, that even the richest man alive could be silenced, not by shouting, not by chaos, but by truth spoken with composure. And yet, that silence was only the beginning of the firestorm. The silence that followed Crockett's 8th point didn't stay contained in the committee room. It didn't even stay contained within the Capitol walls. Within minutes, the moment exploded outward, bouncing across timelines, hashtags, and television screens until it became something bigger than politics. A cultural event, a digital uprising, a viral reckoning. The first wave hit Twitter. Clips of Musk's frozen expression flooded the platform. A single phrase trended with stunning speed. Crockett silences Musk. By noon it had climbed past celebrity gossip, past breaking news, past everything else. Thousands of tweets carried the same rhythm. The disbelief that Musk, the world's loudest billionaire, had been struck mute by one Congresswoman's unwavering calm. One viral tweet read, 7 interruptions. One answer. Musk's voice gone. Crockett's voice everywhere. Memes arrived just as quickly. Some superimposed Crockett's face onto the image of a boxer, landing a final blow while Musk stumbled backward. Others looped his awkward silence with captions like, buffering, or error 404 comeback not found. Late-night comedians picked it up within hours, joking about how the man who builds rockets couldn't launch a response. Talk shows, podcasts, TikTok influencers, all seized on the moment, reshaping it into sound bites, GIFs, parody skits, and trending audio. But beyond the jokes, something deeper stirred. The moment had become a vessel for people's frustrations. And people saw through the fissures. Yet in the midst of celebration, Jasmine Crockett herself refused to indulge in victory laps. Cameras caught her walking out of the chamber not with a grin, but with her usual measured pace. When asked by a reporter how it felt to silence Elon Musk, she shook her head. It wasn't about silencing him, she said quietly. It was about making sure the truth could be heard. That refusal to gloat only deepened the resonance. She hadn't come for the memes, for the hashtags, for the late-night punchlines. She had come for accountability, for the principle that no fortune could outrun responsibility. Her composure reminded her supporters and her critics that this wasn't performance. It was a stand, and in that refusal the story gained a sharper edge. Because while the world laughed at Musk's stumble, Crockett herself was already thinking about the bigger picture. She knew the silence was powerful, but she also knew it was fleeting. Memes fade. Hashtags trend and vanish. What mattered was whether this moment could be transformed into momentum, whether it could push the country closer to the accountability it needed. The world was ready to call it a knockout. She was ready to call it a beginning, but Crockett herself refused to celebrate because for her, it was about something bigger. When the noise of memes, headlines, and late-night jokes finally began to settle, Jasmine Crockett made sure the story didn't get lost in the spectacle. To her, this had never been about a viral moment or a sparring match with the richest man alive. It was about something older, deeper, something etched into the fabric of democracy itself. She reminded the country that the exchange was not Crockett versus Musk. That frame was too small, too shallow. What had unfolded in that committee room was the clash of dignity against arrogance, of accountability against entitlement. One woman's patience had carried the weight of millions who had been dismissed, interrupted, or underestimated in their own lives. Musk had money. Musk had reach. Musk had power. But Crockett had something far more enduring, composure rooted in purpose. In her post-hearing reflections, Crockett spoke to this truth. It's not about me, she told an interviewer. It's about the principle that every voice deserves space, no matter how loud someone else tries to shout it down. If we lose that, we lose democracy. Her words rippled across platforms not as a punchline, but as a reminder, an anchor in a storm of noise. The beauty of that moment was not only in Musk's silence, but in what it revealed, that ordinary voices, steady and unbroken, can stand taller than fortunes. That dignity, when wielded with patience, can outlast the bluster of arrogance, and that democracy is not measured by who shouts the loudest, but by who refuses to be silenced. For those who had seen themselves in Crockett, the lesson struck deep. A young teacher tweeted, "I play that clip when my students think their words don't matter." A single mother posted, "Watching her stay calm reminded me I can face my boss without fear." Even activists abroad shared it, writing, "If it can happen in America's halls of power, it can happen anywhere." This was no longer about politics. It was about the universal truth that dignity is the great equalizer. Power can buy influence, but it cannot buy grace. Wealth can demand attention, but it cannot command respect. Respect is earned, and Crockett's quiet defiance had reminded a weary nation of that timeless principle. The crescendo built not from volume, but from resonance. Millions didn't just witness a billionaire fall silent. They witnessed themselves rising in that silence. Crockett had given them validation, the kind that lingers long after hashtags fade. She had proven that composure could be revolutionary. That calm could be thunderous, and that truth, even spoken softly, can echo louder than arrogance ever imagined. And so, as the story of that hearing passed into history, the lesson endured. It wasn't about silencing one man. It was about uplifting the power of countless others. Crockett had shown that democracy still belonged to the people, not to the billionaires who believed they could bend it to their will. Because in America, silence can be the loudest victory of all. 7 interruptions, 7 attempts to dominate, dismiss, and derail. But in the end, it took just one answer, one silencing truth, to flip the entire balance of power. That is the story of Jasmine Crockett versus Elon Musk. Not a clash of personalities, but a revelation of values. Dignity can outlast arrogance. Patience can break through noise. And silence, when earned, can speak louder than any billionaire's voice. That's why this moment matters. Because it isn't confined to a hearing room in Washington. It lives in every classroom where a student refuses to be talked over. In every workplace where a worker stands firm. In every kitchen table conversation where someone chooses courage over silence. The lesson isn't just about Crockett, it's about us. About you. About the belief that truth, carried with composure, can stand against even the richest and loudest of opponents. And if you believe in that, if you believe in dignity over arrogance, in democracy over ego, then this is your space. Join us, subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice matters. Because together we can build a community that doesn't just watch history, but pushes it forward. Crockett's moment was unforgettable, but it was also just the beginning. The next confrontation, the next test, the next silence that roars, it's all still to come. And we'll be here to break it down, to dramatize it, to make sure no one forgets what's at stake. 7 interruptions, 1 silencing truth, and this won't be the last time truth finds its voice.